All righty, everybody. Thanks for attending. This is our follow-up meeting from a couple of weeks ago when we were discussing digital playback with streamers, servers, a little bit into DACs. And we are having the follow-up discussion tonight, focusing mainly on DACs, but we can cover all aspects of digital streaming. So thank you all for attending. It ought to be an interesting conversation. And thank you, Leo, for proposing a number of areas to discuss, such as the interfaces, the actual digital audio technology, meaning the DAC chips, the format of the music being streamed, as well as other aspects of the devices, DACs, power supplies, the clock, user interface, and so forth. So rather than me doing all the talking, let me just turn it over. Who would like to? Oh, by the way, if anybody would like to speak, please raise your hand. And I prefer that everybody stay muted until they're speaking, just so we don't have any background noise. So please mute yourself unless you're speaking. And would anybody like to volunteer to lead off the discussion?
I
If
can't
not,
see
I
the
guess.
raise your hand icon. Where is it? I'm looking for it.
Oh, it might be under more, depending upon what device you're using. Under reactions.
Oh, reactions. I see that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. See it. Yeah.
Let me just by a show of hands, I'm curious. I talked about this briefly before we started. How many of you are using DACs, if you're using DACs, that retailed, at least initially, for $5,000 or more? And if you can just do it by show of hands, either the icon or your hand. So three of us have.
Yeah,
And
I would add to that the DAC I have in my home system is in that category or above, but the DAC I have in my system here in Georgia is significantly less. And I am constantly impressed and surprised by the detail and the quality of the audio with less expensive equipment. I think the digital technology has come a long, long way in a quick short period of time. So that's, so I'm on both sides of the fence, frankly.
it was many years ago. Some of you who are longtime members of the club may remember this. The company that manufactures the ESS DAC chips, which are popular, the engineers, and I think the owners of the company as well, formed a new high-end audio company called Resonance Audio, which was going to be using the top of the line chips and technology, and they sold a number of DACs. One of them was the Invicta, it was called. It was the first one they came out with, and they actually sent me a demo version of it. As I mentioned, I was part of an audiophile club, and they wanted feedback, and we had a DAC shootout actually in my home with using, I think, 3 or 4 different DACs, and it was interesting. I personally thought it was good. At the time I had a benchmark DAC. I think I don't remember what else we used. I didn't record that, but um, most of the attendees felt that it wasn't quite up to par versus the benchmark, as I recall. But there was another one. I think Craig Phones had a much higher end DAC that was a Wadia DAC. That's right, it was a Wadia DAC that everybody liked the best. And I gave them good feedback, and they appreciated that. And they were in business for a while. I don't believe they're actually manufacturing DACs anymore, although they still have an active website. But maybe it'd be interesting to do a shootout. I'd love to do that between a very inexpensive DAC and one that's much higher priced, and see what differences we might tease out. What do you all think? Will, you've had 2 different price points. How much of a difference is there between the two? Of course, it's 2 different systems.
Insignificant. It's hard to do a true blind shootout because, you have to have a lot of technology that we don't have available. But in a single blind shootout, with people that are younger than I am, people my own age group, and my wife who has better hearing than I'll probably ever have, we were frankly about a 50-50 draw between a really expensive DAC and a very inexpensive DAC, not the cheapest, but a few years ago. And Ray Vanabelle actually bought that DAC on my recommendation, the expensive one. And it was kind of disheartening, frankly, because we couldn't tell. I mean, we would pick one and say, we write it down, go back, do 3 or 4 more, then write it down, and it was a draw. So some sounded better, some sounded worse, we thought, but there was no, it wasn't like you were changing your phono cartridge or you were changing the impedance on the turntable, whatever. I mean, you weren't doing anything major to it. And all of a sudden it's like, you know, why am I paying all this extra money for a device that's just doing something that the engineering has caught up with? And the engineering is really, really good now. Now, I'll grant you, early on in this whole process, 10, 15 years ago, DACs were vastly different, I think, in the way they sounded, Alan. But today, I hate to agree with some of the engineering guys like ASR and stuff, but they really, once they get to a certain level, they really are transparent. And it's more about the speakers in the room and everything else than it is about the DAC itself. That's been my take on it, for whatever it's worth. So.
Yeah, we'll get to Leo and Gary in a moment. I'll just comment briefly to follow up on that. I think it's really more so the implementation of maybe the power supply and certainly the output stage in terms of how it sounds, more so than the DAC chip and implementation. That's the key. And again, it's becoming a commoditized item. And that's why we've seen the price points, plummeting as they have, which is great for the hobby.
I agree 100%. I've tried to eliminate that by using the AES output. And I've been trying to get my whole system to be digital all the way from in to out, because once I got away from analog and sold my turntable, it was like, I'm trying to make the AES, make the whole pass through digitally as clean as possible and as accurate as possible. So right now I'm using AES outputs on my streamer device. And the funny thing is, I have analog outputs on it too, or I can go through the coax output and feed it into, of all things, and then my second system up here, a Yamaha A6A receiver, which is not an expensive piece of gear. And I'll be goddamned if I can hear the difference between the A6A and the AES output into my studio monitors, which have built-in crossovers and amplifiers. So I must be getting old, guys. That's all I can say, but it all sounds really, really good, and I'm grateful for that. So,
all right, I see John, but let me get to Leo and then Gary and then John. So, Leo, you have the floor.
Yeah, I was going to say that, like with anything, sometimes, we get into comparisons, and it's good to think about the context, right? Because there are so many variables at play, right? That you have. You compare a DAC with another DAC, and that's not all, right? Because you're not listening to just the DAC, unfortunately. I wish there was such a thing as a sort of a go-to reference system that we could all like go to, but that does not exist, right? We all have our own systems, right? And the cables and everything else that we have, and we got to deal with that. But seriously, when we say this DAC versus that DAC, I mean, that doesn't tell me the whole story, right? Because what if you were re-listening to a crappy, recording? Well, it's going to sound crappy in both places. So one is not going to be any significantly better than the other, and what if your system is good and it helps the little DAC or whatever? I mean, it's hard to say that it's just the DAC that's making or not making the difference, I think, right? And like we said, there's what streamer you put in front of it. Is it, are you listening to streamer differences or DAC differences or cable differences or interface differences or format differences, right? I mean, it's complex. It's not easy to answer that question, I don't think. But I do
everything
agree.
in high-end audio, yeah, you got a whole series of components, and a lot of it is basically matching components. And one set,
but I think with digital it gets even more complex, right? Because there are so many different things. But I do agree in general, with the point I was made about the fact that we've come such a long way, and things that may cost you $500, could sound as good as $5,000 did 5 years ago, right? That is, I think that's probably true.
Yeah, definitely so. Gary, and then John, and then Colin.
Okay, as I've said before, I'm coming to this from the unbelieving side, like squinting at the audio industry and wondering why are you selling these things? My CD player has digital out, obviously, and I use Toslink or fiber optic cable connection to take the digital out of the CD player and put it into my system, into the receiver. Why in the world would I want to stick a digital to analog converter in there and send the receiver an analog signal? What's going on? What
Well,
would
the
happen if you
theory,
took that thing out of there?
well, your receiver has a DAC built in, but since they had to build it to a certain price point, the theory is that you'd have a higher quality DAC capability with an outboard DAC. For instance, nowadays, like this $329 WIM Ultra that I bought, that is all-in-one streamer, DAC, you name it, room correction. The DAC chip there, they're using the latest ESS 3098 chip, or 9038, I guess it is. And that's the state of the art for that particular manufacturer of DAC chips. That may be better than what your older receiver has. The theory is also maybe it has a better analog output stage than does the receiver. But you'd
What
have
is
to
the
compare to
nature of
see if
that?
it's worth it.
What is the nature of that analog output, and how does it get into your system then?
Well, let's say you had an analog input on your receiver that then amplifies the signal and passes it to your speakers. If you've got a cleaner analog, less jitter theoretically coming from a higher quality DAC, that's one of the theoretical benefits from paying more, although that remains to be seen if it's even audible. We can certainly get into that. But having an outboard DAC, like any other separates component, you could theoretically have a higher overall quality of the signal and how it's processed. For instance, stereo separation, noise floor, and so forth. Doesn't mean you do by buying separates, but that's the theoretical reason to do so. And that's why most audiophiles have separates rather than an all-in-one receiver as you have. But a lot of us use receivers as well as part of our system. I have an Anthem receiver I use sometimes for music, usually for home theater, but it's a good, nice receiver, quite capable.
Well, chances are the signal's going to go through a couple more ADA stages before it gets to your power amplifier. Are you using your expensive new DAC to substitute for the ones in your receivers?
I am it's not, I have an old Bel Canto, 12 or 14 years old, that I still use primarily for 2-channel listening, but I also, I'm trying to think, I'm not using it with the receiver. I am using my streamer going into the receiver as another optional way of playing music.
But Gary, if you're happy, just stick with what you got, right? You don't have to buy a
Well,
separate.
where does your analog output of your DAC go?
In my case,
Straight.
it passes to my preamp. Analog input on my Conrad Johnson tube preamp, which has a little bit of tube warmth and distortion that I like.
It's
You
like
don't
a
even
line
need a
output, right?
preamp.
It's like any line output of
Yeah.
any other thing, right? Like you take your
Yeah.
phono preamp has a line out, right? Your tuner, if you have a tuner, right? You have a line out from that, and your DAC has a line out, and all those things go to an integrated amplifier or a preamp, if you will, or a receiver, what have you.
Okay. Why not jump on putting another ADA stage in your system? I don't get it.
I
Well,
don't know what it is.
You're
Can I jump in here?
bypassing. Yeah, let me clarify. Yeah, you can. Gary, we're bypassing what's in your receiver. That's all we're doing is we're not adding another conversion step, although you could, but you're basically, instead of letting your receiver do digital to analog conversion and then feeding your preamp stage in the receiver, we're just bypassing that, doing the digital to audio conversion in an outboard box, feeding the line in analog signal directly to the receiver. Same thing. You're just
I'm
replacing
just
one circuit for another.
Yeah, you
We
remember
can
when
get Phil in
receivers used to have a phono stage built in, right? You remember those days? I mean, you may still find
those
them, right?
days. Anyway,
Right?
I'll defer to Phil maybe on this, but I'll guarantee there's more ADA stages gonna happen by the time it gets to the power amp that I don't see the advantage of sticking your expensive one in the line as well. Anyway, I'll shut up.
There are no more stages, right? I mean, basically, you take the digital signal running through a digital to analog converter, and that's it. After that, it becomes a line out.
I've got a pair of Behringer DEQ 2496s doing equalization and some gain and stuff like that
Oh,
before it gets to my power amp.
I see. That's you. Okay, I got you. So you are doing some DSP related stuff in there. So you got to go into the digital domain anyways.
Yeah, it just gets re-ADA'd
Yeah,
down
yeah,
the line.
yeah.
So the fantastic quality coming out of my $5,000 DAC is not going to
Mhm.
make a bit of difference.
I
But
agree
you're
with
doing
you.
more steps. You are doing more steps. I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
This WIM Ultra that I just got, $329 retail price. It's a streamer, it's a DAC, it has a display, headphone output. It has built-in room correction that they've just implemented now. It's still beta for Android. It's already implemented for Apple devices. And apparently it's a pretty good room EQ type of measurement. So you can actually, in that little device, do your own room EQ, and it has a separate equalizer if you want to bump up a frequency or bring down some peaks. Amazing for $329.
Oh,
So having that ability to play with the digital signal even prior to feeding it through the to the analog conversion is interesting. Okay, John, and then Colin.
So what I think is the higher price point versus the lower price point DACs have come much closer together than when they first started. Give you an example. I started out with a Carver tube CD player that sounded really good, and it was output analog. And I was like, "Oh, this is great. That's all I need," and this and that. And then a friend of mine got a California Audio Labs DAC from Sound Advice. Remember the Sound Advice?
Sure.
And I'm like, I'm getting one too. So we went in there. We got a good deal on two of them. And damn, if that thing didn't sound way better than my Carver. So that replaced, in fact, that California Audio Lab, that tube DAC, like outdid a lot of more expensive DACs. So the thing was $600, which is low comparatively now compared to the prices now. But now I think as we went into that was in 90s, I think as we went into the 2000s and the teens and now we're in the 20s, I think they're coming closer and closer together. That's what I'm seeing anyways. Give you another example, what happened with Bart, the technology's just improved so much. He had a very expensive Meitner DAC that he actually sent away to get modified to sound better. And he loved this, he loved the Meitner DAC. I mean, loved it. And so fast forward to the present, then what happened was he got a Anthem receiver, and he tried the DAC in the Anthem receiver, and it was way better because I heard it too. But then, in my opinion, obviously we didn't double blind it, for AJ's sake. But it sounded a lot better because the technology's improved so much. So that little Weem DAC, I can pretty much guarantee it's pretty darn good just because of the technology. But I think what Gary was saying also, I have all digital system. I don't convert to analog till the very end. And I have it going through multiple processors. If you go into these processors and convert D to A to D, D to A, you're going to ruin the sound. So I think that's really more critical than the DAC, the DAC chip. The DAC chip I have a mini DSP processor, and it has an AKM DAC chip in it, which is really good. But the darn thing sounds great. I mean, I have no problem with it. I needed a processor for crossovers, and because I do all active crossovers. But my point being is these DACs just, I think, have evolved over a period of time and just have gotten better and better signal to noise ratio wise. I do have, I got rid of the digital power supply though. I do have an analog type power supply. And that I think that's was critical for me. But it's kind of strange that I'm saying this because everyone thinks like the source is so critical, you know, but I think the sources, in my opinion, are coming closer and closer together, even at different price points, my opinion.
John, does your signal stay all digital all the way through your system?
Yeah. Yep. I go, okay. I go from my Arender into the same unit as you have, the digital processor. That goes digitally to a mini DSP. That goes digitally to subwoofer to a subwoofer processor. That goes digitally to my subwoofer. So it's all digital all the way through until the end. That's one thing I don't want to do is convert back and forth. And you can hear that difference, I think, more than the difference of DACs, is if you keep converting like that.
Do you do any room EQ, John, as well?
Yeah, I do. I definitely do. I do the REW, and my basic thing is I do it manually. I don't use DAC or anything like that, even though I have it. I rather do it manually. And what I do is get it flat, and I work on it. It takes a while. Don't get me wrong. It takes a few weekends to do it right. But then if I want a house curve, I could just tilt the house curve up after I get the thing flat. So yeah, I definitely do room. I use the Room EQ Wizard to measure my system and at the listening seat. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, that's why I think that there's still some room for further technological development, like what WIM is doing by offering Room EQ and parametric equalization within this cheap unit, and having all that with the programming and the computing power they can build into these chips nowadays, that it could basically, you know, even replace a mini DSP or any of these other outboard systems and have it all incorporated in one chassis. And I think that's the direction we're heading in, where the most improvement, I think, remains to be had. Time will tell. I haven't played with the Room EQ yet in this WIM Ultra, but it sounds interesting from what I've read. Colin, your hand is up.
Okay, hey guys, good to see everybody. I too had the California Audio Labs DAC. I remember thinking it was a great value at the time. I haven't used it in, I don't know what, decades. I've tried to sell it. The prices are gone through the roof. I think the one I got, I don't know, I want to say it was $100. And now what, the cheapest one is like $600, and I can't sell the old one. I think it's less than a Gamma. I think the lowest end one is a Gamma, and I can't even sell the old one for $100. I have the Behringer Ultra Curve DEQ, Gary, and I believe you've got a DAC in there, because I think my Ultra Curve Pro has a DAC in there. So it doesn't actually make any sense, depending on where that is in your chain. It doesn't make any sense for you to be doubling up on DACs. And then the third thing I wanted to say was Mike Brevard, bless him. He puts on the show, and he also has a showroom down here in Sarasota, which he used to invite us to, but I guess maybe he's a little bit too busy flying around. He keeps saying he's going to do it. I query him, Alan, every once in a while. I don't know, every couple months. Oh yeah, I'm going to do it in a couple months. Oh no, the show's coming up. Oh no, I'm too busy after the show, maybe in a couple months. So I can't remember the last time we had one. They're absolutely wonderful. How long's it been? A year at least, maybe two. But he hasn't been doing it. But he did do one once, and he invited Cord out, and I think it was something that Susan Perry said that made me think of it. And Cord came out, and they basically told us, yes, we come up with a new DAC, and we do these wonderful things with it, whatever it is, maybe a better chip or, whatever that they think is important enough. And they come out with a new DAC, and it's $5,000. And they sell so many of those units. And then over a period of time, they come out with another one. Now, they don't really say what they do to differentiate it, but this one is clearly at a different price point. And they sell 10 times more units. And then they come out with another one, and it's an even lower price point. And guess what? They sell 1,000 times more units. So the really high-end stuff is just to get everybody's attention. You know, oh, Cord has a new DAC. Oh, it's got these features. Oh, it's got this new chip. I love it because it's pure marketing. Because there are people out there who will say, you know, yeah, I need that $5,000 DAC. It must be better. It's going in my main system, and you know, it's worth it to me. And then there's people like me who come along and say, gee, I can get the third iteration for pennies on the dollar, and I'm getting like the Behringer, I'm getting this really good DAC chip in there, and I forget what it is, and I'm getting it. I think it was Brown Burr. Brown Burr used to be big, right? Before
Burr
ESS.
Brown, right?
Burr Brown, right? Thank you. Oh, I'm getting this Burr Brown chip, and it's in this equalizer. What a great value that is.
I thought Cord used an FPGA in their most expensive DACs.
Phil, you're next.
Could. Yeah, they could. Yeah, I don't know.
All right, Phil, you've had your hand up. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, can I ask Alan, how do you put your hand up? Where's that on this?
Under, it depends what type of computer or smartphone you're using. If you look under more and reactions, you might see it there, or it might be on the bottom, like taskbar of icons and such.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe it's easier because then I can call on people in chronological order.
Oh, by the way, you know what I found, Alan, that if I expand the browser window of the Zoom, then if I make it wide enough, then I get the reactions icon on the bottom of the screen now. So I don't have to go to more necessarily, right? It collapses things into more if you don't open your screen wide enough.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good trick.
Okay.
Yeah, good point.
Let me see it.
All right. So Phil, you had your hand up.
Yeah, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. All right. I wanted to say a couple of things. First off, end-to-end digital conversion is a really ideal concept. Okay. And if you look at the recording studio, they're trying to do that now really and maintain the integrity of the signal from the microphone all the way out to the digital recorder. And one of the ways they do that is they use a master clock. Okay. Now, and they also use a very accurate clock, very low phase shift clock. And so all the equipment in the studio is plugged into one clock, okay? And that maintains the integrity of that signal as it gets transferred from one digital unit to a next, because otherwise every digital unit has its own independent clock. And they are not in sync, folks. They are never going to be in sync. So you have to use a master clock. All right, so let's take that step one logical leap further to home audio. How do we get a really accurate clock in home audio? Now, there's a lot of people that are manufacturing DACs right now with really good clocks. OCXO is one version of it. That's a oven-controlled crystal oscillator, and it's a very precise clock. It's also not that expensive. You know, it's nothing like an atomic clock or anything like that. But it's a very accurate, quote unquote, budget version of timekeeping that helps maintain the phase between the digital signals. Okay. And I know everybody's going to say, well, you can't hear phase. Well, you got to hear one of these clocks. And if you haven't heard one, you won't know. So, and I've heard one. In fact, I have one in my system right now. And I absolutely cannot live without it. It really unifies the sound. Okay, it makes the soundstage huge. It really helps resolution and detailing. You know, all of the things that you hear about high end.
So you need a DAC with an external clock input?
Excuse me?
You need a DAC that has an external clock input?
Do you need a DAC that has an external clock input? The answer to that is no.
Okay.
Of course, I use network streaming. I use Ethernet streaming, and I use my old Oppo. I have a 205 that I use as my DAC, and it sounded okay until I got a clock, and once I put the clock in there, holy cow, everything changed. So
Well, was that something you added? You
Synchronizes
do a
all
lot
the
of
clocks?
modifications. So
No.
did you,
no.
how do
no.
you,
How do you
how do
get
you
the
get the
clock in there,
clock?
Phil?
Pardon?
How do you get the clock in your system?
Okay, now let me explain how this piece of equipment works. Okay. Remember, I'm using Ethernet streaming. I'm not using USB streaming. And there are the same types of devices that are available for USB connections. Okay, and I think EtherRegen makes a version of it, but the clock in it is okay. It's not great, but you'll hear a small difference with that. If you find a better clock, you'll hear more of a difference. So, you know, in addressing the issue of staying digital from, you know, the microphone all the way to the amplifier, that's a great idea. I support that completely. But what happens in between has to be accounted for also. It's kind of like what happens when you put a crummy interconnect cable on a microphone, you know, before it even gets to the mixer, it's trash. So, you know, it picks up hum or whatever. And so the same type of detail has to be paid attention to in the digital stream. And I'm using a clock that's made by a company called LHY. I don't know if you've ever heard of these folks. It goes by another name, some guy's name Audio, but I can't remember his name. So if it's a Chinese unit. Anyway,
Hey, Phil,
yes, sir.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but are you thinking of Vinshine?
Of which?
Vinshine.
No,
Okay,
no,
sorry. Okay,
no
keep
worries.
going.
Yeah, so you know, there's more to numbers than ones and zeros. There's time, you know, and that has to be accounted for. So
Well, how does your clock, how does this LHY, whatever it is,
okay,
fit
what
into
it
your system?
does is it takes the LHY is just before the input to my elbow. Okay. So it's a network clock that basically regenerates the signal and unifies its time base before it gets to the DAC. Okay, everybody with me?
How do you
Not
connect
really.
it?
Network and DACs or clocks, there's a whole
Is
different
it like
ballgame.
Ethernet? Is it an Ethernet
It's an
device?
Ethernet device.
Oh boy. Okay.
Okay, it's not a USB device. It's not an external type clock that has a, you know, a clock output to a DAC input or something like that. Although I think this version does not. No, it doesn't.
Yeah, I
In
So-
found
effect,
that,
does it synchronize all the clocks in your system then?
What it does is it takes whatever signal goes to the Ethernet input of my DAC and cleans it up. It basically straightens all the jitter out.
But isn't there also a clock, doesn't the Oppo have a clock itself?
Yeah, it does. It does.
So you're not bypassing that clock, you
No, I'm
still have
not.
another clock.
No, I'm not. The only thing I'm doing is I'm providing a higher quality digital signal to that clock.
And
Okay,
how much does that device sell for?
$850.
Yeah, but I
Max?
think we're maybe I should raise my hand. Let me just do that.
Well, go ahead, Leo. We hear you.
Okay, so I was going to say, Phil, you know, I think we went through some emails on this, but essentially you're cleaning up the internet input into your DAC, and your DAC has a built-in clock in it, right? So
Correct.
basically, you know, if you think about it, what comes over from the internet or Ethernet, whatever, it's a file. You're basically moving a file from some server onto your DAC, and your DAC is rendering that information. So you're getting rid of network jitter, which is good. It's not a bad thing to do, but I'm just saying there's a different clock that then kicks in when you go. The DAC has a clock. You can't bypass that clock.
You're correct. Absolutely correct. I have no argument with that whatsoever.
So
Okay.
you
But
are using it.
But you see, we're talking apples and oranges. Okay.
Yes, we are.
What we're talking about in the DAC is its own clock. Okay, which has its own jitter.
Yeah, but that's a digital clock on the DAC side, and there's the internet thing on the front side of it before the DAC.
Let's stop talking about that because I think you're confusing this, and that's
Okay.
why I didn't respond to you. Okay,
okay.
so have you? It would be a if you haven't heard this unit in your system, if you have an Ethernet input to your DAC and haven't heard a unit like this, like a good clock that squares up the signal before your DAC gets it with its clock, you won't believe how much it changes. You really won't. Okay, and now the reason that it does it is kind of an analog like this. Okay, say for example, you have a, boy, I can't even think of a good example. I'll have to come back to that. Okay, but for now, know that I use this to
I
clean
can-
up the clock before my DAC gets it.
I can, Phil. If you don't
Excuse me?
mind I can, if you don't mind my interjecting.
Sure.
A few years ago, every single railroad in the United States used a different time system. And this one guy wrote an article and he said, gee, why don't they all use the same clock? And boom, within just a few short years, all the railroad systems all used the same clock. They were all in sync, and all the trains left the station at the same time, albeit, with time zone differences, which was part of his suggestion. And all of them arrived at the same time. They were all on the same clock. So the link that I posted, he explains what a master clock is. It's in the chat.
Yeah, but this
Yeah.
is not a master clock. What Phil is referring
No.
to is something that cleans up
No.
your internet input, that stuff that goes into the internet input of the DAC, if that's the way you're going, or
It's-
the streamer if you have a streamer. And
It's-
it's fine to do that, right? All I'm trying to say though, that he's not removing the clock that's in the DAC. That
No.
clock is still there. It's a different
Absolutely.
clock. Right, and
100%
you're not
agree.
removing it. You're giving the whole thing a better signal to start off with, which is an
Right.
improvement. And I do agree with you, Phil, that that's a good thing. I'm not disputing that.
Right.
What I'm saying that is not a master clock per se. That's replacing the whole thing. It is not replacing the DAC clock.
It is not.
Okay.
So the DAC
100%
clock is
correct.
the DAC clock is a rate limiting step, basically, in terms of how accurate it is to make sure everything is time aligned as it goes through the conversion process.
It's true, but remember, garbage in, garbage out. Okay.
Let me throw, when I see Will and Tony have their hands up, let me interject
Okay.
another confounding factor here, and that is a buffer, the buffer effect. Because, for instance, I was playing around with the Squeezebox Touch, has about a 30-second buffer. If I'm playing music and I disconnect the Ethernet from it, it'll keep playing music for 30 seconds. So it's filled up, like a memory cache. And then whatever clock it uses, which I'm sure is dirt cheap, if at all, then aligns everything as it goes through the conversion process. I did the same experiment with the new WIM Ultra. It lasted for about a minute. So it has a bigger memory cache, a buffer, and then it stacks up the bits, so to speak, and then the native clock then time aligns everything as it goes through the digital to analog conversion process. So if you have a decent clock in the DAC chip or the DAC itself, and you have a decent buffer, does it really matter if things are out of alignment prior to that? Because it's all going to get stacked up and then time aligned as at the final step.
Correct. That's correct. The whole design of Ethernet doesn't allow the problems you're talking about.
Yeah. It nullifies the need for a jitter network clock.
That's correct.
Yep.
I mean, it's interesting. There are DACs that, I don't know if they're probably still, I'm sure the more expensive it is, the more likely it is to have an input for a separate master clock that's even higher quality than what they include.
Yeah, but let's not confuse the master clock of a DAC with this network
This is different.
front end thing that Phil is referring to, which may be an improvement. I'm not disputing that, but I'm saying that is different from the so-called master clock of a DAC, which you can get, right? You can get a DAC that takes in an external clock input, and you can feed it a better clock than what it has in it. That you can do.
You can
I don't have that. I don't have that option in my DAC, but some DACs do have it.
You can feed it a master clock, which is what they need in the studio when they have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 pieces of gear that are all processing the signal, and they need to be in the same time, just like time code. It's the same thing. You can't make a movie or a TV show without time code. It's the same thing with audio. You have to have something in the front end that keeps everything together. When you get it home and you play it back off the Ethernet or the internet, the design of the internet does not allow for the problems you're talking about. It won't start playing until everything's there.
You're going to have to
Exactly.
come over and listen to my system because we can AB it in a heartbeat.
I'd love to.
Can you lend that out, Phil? Is that something that is easy to intersperse just right before your Ethernet?
The answer to that is I would love to do this. Okay. But if my wife wants to watch a movie or something like that, it would be a heartbreak for her, you know. So
Does it have its own
I
power
use-
supply? Does it have its own power
It
supply
does.
also?
Yeah, yeah, no, that one has a built-in, and it has an analog supply built into it.
What's it called? LHY?
Yeah, LHY, and the model is SW6.
Let's see, let me look it up.
Huh.
I will
Yeah,
tell
we'll
you
have to check
guys,
that out.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt, Phil. I think you may have confused something there just momentarily, Phil. So the SW6 is the Ethernet switch. You might be, I think you may have wanted to refer to the OCK, the clock that you're talking about.
No, I'm
Oh,
talking
okay.
about the SW6.
Okay, you're just talking about the network switch.
well,
Got it.
okay,
Oh, so it's just a network switch.
it's just a switch.
It's a high precision. It's a switch with a high precision clock.
Yeah, I have the same switch. It's quite good.
Okay. Well, let's switch
Remember,
topics.
I don't know about this clock business, that gets in, we are getting into clocks, but the internet packets there's no clock, right? When you a switch doesn't have a clock. There is no clock.
That's right.
I don't know why this clock came into the conversation, but
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Okay.
there is jitter. I mean, packets do arrive out of order, right? You may have gaps. You may drop a packet. So yes, if you buffer things up, so this thing may be cleaning up noise and buffering, and then giving you a steady stream that doesn't have any of those side effects. It doesn't look dirty, and it doesn't have gaps in between packets, but it's doing the buffering on the front end, right? Basically, and then giving you something that's already kind of conditioned, if you will. But there is no clock per se. Like you think of a pulse. The internet packets don't have a clock. It's an asynchronous interface, meaning there is no clock.
Well, may I
switch-
respond to that?
Yeah.
Just briefly?
Sure.
Okay, that's a lie. Every single internet packet
But
goes
listen,
through a
I'm an electrical
No, wait a
engineer.
minute.
This is what
Let
I
me-
do for a living, Phil.
Let me finish, okay? Because every single internet packet goes through more than one computer, and every single computer has its own clock. Okay? Do you agree with that?
Not really, right? And because
So how
internet
do you
packets
get
are
a
not
signal?
clock-based. They're
How do
not
you get an Ethernet
clock-based.
signal from one end to the other without using a computer?
When you look at an internet signal, if you look at the internet lines, there is no clock in there. There's no clock. But packets, I mean, if you if you take the packets and you remove the latency in between packets, you could think of that as a clock, I guess. But because it's making
No.
sure there are no gaps in between packets, maybe that's what you're referring to. But it's really
No,
not
what
a clock in the strict sense
I
of the
think
word.
I think we need to take this discussion offline because I think we're confusing folks.
Well, let's agree to disagree, but move on to a different topic since
Yeah.
we don't have a clear-cut answer here, and we're not familiar totally with the technology. But let's first of all, we skipped over the interfaces, which Leo had suggested, and between USB, optical, I2S, how important is that different interface in terms of delivering the highest quality signal? Are we at a point where they're all equivalent, or does one clearly have a substantial benefit over others? I've heard good things about I2S. I've never used it, and certainly fiber optic or optical cable can help eliminate noise, but there are limitations still with bandwidth with optical. Toslink, I think, typically is a max of 2496, I believe. What are your thoughts on that?
I think Perry has a hands up. Perry?
Yeah, Will?
Will, yeah, some reason my wife's name comes up as Susan. It's
Yeah.
she's not here. Believe me, she's not. She likes to sew and weave. She would be like falling sound asleep at this conversation, guys. I'm not the. But what were we talking about? We were talking about packets. You guys, some of you know me, some of you don't. My business, I was in the professional audio business my whole career. So I tend to gravitate toward professional equipment and toward professional standards. And so for me, digital transmission is AES. It used to be AES EBU, just AES, which is basically just an XLR connector with coax signal on it. But you have two channels that ride in the XLR connector, and it gives you some advantages, low noise, you send it for long distances and stuff, but it's basically the exact same system. I've compared the two. I wish I could say that there was a major difference. I just like to use an AES connector because my whole system is based on AES right now. I'm trying to get digital all the way through the system with no conversions whatsoever. But the funny thing is, I will tell you that I spent a lot of time and money converting some of my equipment so that it had AES inputs on it, as opposed to analog inputs on it. And I went back and forth and I bought a bunch of equipment to change it. I tried an RME ADI2 and a bunch of other stuff which had AES outputs on it. And I'll be damned, I couldn't hear the difference between that and the analog input. And I had a couple of friends come over and we did a single blind test, not a double blind test. And we wrote down our opinions on a piece of paper, and it was a 50-50. No one could tell the difference. So I will just go back and say, I want to go all digital. I think it's the smart thing to do. I think that if you're building a big system, you should go all digital, whatever the format may be, because we're all going to go digital eventually, whether we live long enough or not, it's all going to be digital. And an AES system is just a more robust system than a coax or an optical system. Does it make any difference in the sound? I cannot testify one way or the other, guys. But that's my experience. My experience is AES is my preferred modem just because of like the connectors and it's more robust. That's all.
Well, certainly for long distance cable,
Yeah.
for longer cables, and for minimizing noise, it certainly makes sense in the pro audio. But for us, if we got basically a 12-inch or an 18-inch cable going from
Right.
our streamer to our DAC, how critical is that?
Well, but if you're building a home theater, Alan, and you're going to go with multi-channel, and you want to have speakers all around the room, to me, you either send Ethernet around the room and then convert it at the end of the Ethernet cable, or you send AES around the room. The cable is very inexpensive. Connectors are dirt cheap, even if you get the gold connectors. And then you can plug in, you have no loss whatsoever. You don't have any ground issues. You can plug in wherever you want.
This is all digital, right?
All digital, 100%.
All right, okay.
Yeah.
What you're describing is kind of like the equivalent of an XLR in the analog world to the digital world.
Yes,
is that right?
it is indeed an XLR connector. You just use a different cable. You can buy Canar or whatever you want to buy. There's a bunch of professional cables out there that are very inexpensive. That is what's used in the pro audio business. And you're just using an XLR connector for 2 channels as opposed to using a BNC or a coax cable for 2 channels. It's a balanced signal, so you can send it for longer distances with less degradation.
And less noise and all
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yep, it does.
What are
John
you
is
all
next.
using? Yeah, John, but by show of hands, how many of you are using just a digital coax cable, like to go from your streamer to your DAC? That's what I'm using. How about people using I2S? Anybody using I2S?
No.
Okay, how about optical or fiber optic? John. Okay, also Leo, and yeah, most of you.
And I use USB as well.
I actually didn't raise my hand in time, but I'm using I2S.
Can you explain why you're using USB? I'm curious. Are you going from a computer?
Yeah, so the USB connection is between the streamer and the DAC. I have only a couple of options. I don't have that many. I don't have I2S as an option, for example, but I can do AES like you have. AES I could do. I haven't tried that, to be honest. I should try it. But USB, what I like about USB is the fact that it's asynchronous, so it's immune to the, back to our conversation previously about the buffering and all this. So an asynchronous interface, meaning it means that the streamer is delivering USB packets to the DAC, right? and it doesn't matter. They're immune to the clock. It doesn't matter what the clock is,
Correct.
right? So it's just packets. It's just data. Here's the information you need to play. And the DAC then has a big enough buffer to say, okay, I'll assemble that. And then with my clock, I'll play it out. So then
Correct.
the,
Yep.
the clock business, whereas some of those other interfaces like SPDIF, they're what do you call it? Susceptible to the clock.
Somebody's got to be the main clock, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, right.
So not using an asynchronous signal between the streamer and the DAC removes the clock dependency.
Agreed.
What about
Agreed.
noise being transmitted through USB from your computer?
Yeah, so this is not a computer, right? Is a streamer, right? Is a dedicated little box that it takes an Ethernet input and it puts out a USB output,
Right.
right?
Okay.
And
Okay.
then it allegedly is called to fame is the fact that it does so, and it does have a clean. It's an auralic areas. I don't know if you've
Mhm.
heard of it, and
Oral
it's
like,
playing.
yeah.
Yeah, it's they're supposedly have galvanic isolation and all this jazz that it should give you a clean USB signal on the
Right.
output.
Well,
Mhm.
recording
Okay.
studios use USB for up to 128 channels. So
Interesting.
no problems.
Okay. Very interesting. John?
So I actually talked to one of the designers of the Arender when I bought my Arender. It was, I think Ori was there, or what his name was, and he said it depends on the unit. He said there's certain units, in his opinion, that sound better with optical. Certain units sound better than coax. Certain units sound better than with AES EBU. So that's what he told me. So he said try different outputs. Is what he told me, and that's exactly what I did. I ran an AES EBU 20 feet. So this is 20 feet, and then I ran a glass optical cable with really good termination. Glass optical, not regular cheap run-of-the-mill home theater type of optical. Glass optical. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it at different places. The AES EBU, I can compare it just at a push of the button. And to me, the optical sounds smoother. It's easier to listen to. Sounds more analog. AES EBU is good. Don't get me wrong, it's good. But to me, the glass optical digital optical cable was the best that I tried.
Did you have the right impedance for the AS cable, John?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, it goes in and out. Yep. Carries the right signal. I didn't
No, it has to be.
I didn't change.
It's a 45 ohm cable?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And in fact, I specially ordered it online. They made the cable for me.
Okay. Yeah. You have to have that,
and
otherwise it won't work well.
And I made sure, and I didn't want to run the coax that long because it's, after 5 feet, the coax doesn't run as good. So that's why I wanted to get the professional cable. And don't get me wrong, it's good, but in my unit, now in your unit might be different, but in my unit, that glass, you should try, for $10 or whatever. If you're going to use optical, try the glass optical cables. I think they're really good.
Yeah, my stuff's all professional. It all only has AES EBU inputs on it.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I
or
mean, I'm sure
analog.
it's great. I'm sure it's
Yeah,
great. And
yeah.
in your unit, it might be totally different. Yours sounds better that way.
Yeah.
I think it depends on the unit.
Now, for my system, I've tried the glass. I ordered glass, toslink SPDF, and compare that with the coax. When my squeeze box touch into the Belcanto DAC, I still prefer the coax. Again, in my system, maybe that just worked better. However, they implemented it.
Yep. That's right.
So it's interesting. Well, let me ask you, how much? One thing we haven't talked about is the actual chips and design of the DACs, whether it be a Delta Sigma or a resistor ladder or the FGMA, if that's the right nomenclature. What are your thoughts on that? They're different, certainly. Why are there different approaches? And of course, there's tube DACs as well that have tube circuitry as well. But what are your thoughts on the different types of chip designs and the basic mechanism of the DAC chip? Leo, your hand is still up, so you can continue. You're muted.
Apologize, Alan. I didn't intend to speak. Let me lower my hand.
Oh,
Sorry.
sure. Well,
Okay.
if you have thoughts, you can.
Okay. You
Does
mean
anybody
chips?
have? Yeah, chips. Whether you have a resistor ladder DAC or a Sigma
Right.
Delta chip or FGMA approach.
Yeah.
Why are there different approaches, and what are the differences? And should we, should that be a major consideration when we purchase a DAC?
I haven't heard an R2R DAC, so I can't speak from experience there. I've heard chip-based DACs like the ESS you mentioned. I used to work for ESS for a little while in Austin, Texas.
Oh, really?
Back in the day, I did Windows drivers for them. But what I do have for the last couple of years, I have an FPGA-based DAC from Mola Mola. I don't know if you heard the Tambaki DAC.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I have. And there's different schools of thoughts on that, and I don't know that you can, I think the point was made earlier that things have advanced to the point, that it's hard to determine what's best anymore. I don't know that you can say, well, blanket statement FPGA DACs are superior to chip-based DACs. I don't know that you can say that, right? It just depends. There are so many things that go into the implementation of a DAC. And you mentioned, Alan, how good is the output stage? What they do, on the output, right? How good is that? That has something to do. How do they get rid of problems on what they're getting? Are they cleaning up the signal that comes in? Do they have any kind of filtering to remove noise on the front end? Do they buffer up things nicely? A lot of stuff goes on into that. How good is that clock that they have internally? All of that plays into it. How good is the conversion process, right? And then you can skin the cat in many different ways, but there's a lot of ingredients that go into it to really say what makes just because a DAC is FPGA based doesn't make it the best DAC, because it maybe has an output crappy, a crappy output stage, right? So it's a combination of things. So it's hard to tell what's best, but I'm happy with this FPGA based DAC since I've had it compared to what I used to have.
As I mentioned in one of the emails I sent in our discussion, I'm kind of intrigued by this new AKM Velvet DAC chip that supposedly has characteristics of a ladder resistor combined with a standard whatchamacallit, like the ESS. I forgot what the name of it is, but and topping, sells one. I think it's about $650 that has that AKM Velvet Magic chipset. So I'm going to get one of those to try, because I can get a 30-day return window when I get back from my vacation. But I'm curious to compare that to my Bel Canto DAC that uses an older Burr Brown chipset. But my gut feeling is that we're probably, as time goes on, each iteration, regardless of resistor ladders or the other chipsets, get better and better, and maybe we're basically, chasing returns that aren't even audible anymore in terms of improvement. It's more marketing than anything else, I suspect.
But there's also, how they process, right? Like sometimes they upsample before they do any conversion, right? So, and what do they, some they use PCM. So if you feed it a DSV file, the first thing they do, they convert it to PCM, they upsample it to some native rate that they work with, and then they start processing from there. So there's a lot of ingredients in that soup. And what's better? I don't know that you can say for sure.
Yeah, well, I'll get to in a minute. Paul from PS Audio has, I guess their PS Audio was something Stream DAC that they use. I think it's
Pure Audio, something like that. I think they call
Direct Stream.
Yeah.
Direct Stream
yeah.
DAC
Direct
Mark
Stream.
II. It's the one I use.
Yeah, and I think that he says they convert everything to DSD. Even PCM is converted to DSD and processed that way, because
That's
they
correct.
feel that's better.
Everything is converted converted to DSD and then multiplied by 20x, and it's all processed. Everything, and once it's multiplied by 20, everything is done that way.
But that's an FGPA, isn't that FGPA based?
It's FPGA based, PS Audio, the Direct Stream DAC Mark 1 was their first FPGA-based DAC. The one comment I will make about FPGA-based DACs, like the Chord, and I think the Mola Mola and the PS Audios, is they can be surprisingly long-lived because of the improvements that can be made over time in the FPGA code. I had the Mark 1 for probably 7 years before I upgraded to the Mark 2. And over that course of time, it went through a number of FPGA iterations, updates, and some of it was especially the early ones, were to get rid of like weird little bugs and things like that. But over time, the noise floor gets the noise floor lowers. They find better ways of handling the filtering. They find better ways of dealing with out of band spurious issues, and it just gets better. You know, how many people could hold on to a DAC for 7 years and say it's competitive with what is at that point 7 years later still considered a high-end DAC? It's hard to do if it's not an FPGA-based DAC.
That's a good point. Yeah, the upgradability certainly with just programming. Will, your hand is up still? You're muted. You're still muted, Will.
There you go. Sorry, guys, I apologize. I don't know how many guys use Rune for streaming, but if you use Rune, you can go into Rune, which has a very high quality front end for the digital streaming system, and you can set it to upscale everything or whatever you want it to do. But it really takes a lot of the guesswork out of buying a DAC, because it handles a lot of that guesswork in advance. And, you know, because it's technically a bit perfect system for delivering the digital audio to your unit, you might want to try it if you don't have it, because I know it costs a couple $100 a year for the subscription. You got to have to buy a core, but it really, I thought that was probably the largest single improvement I made in my system was when I went to Rune. And also the DSP that's in there is very well implemented, and you can do multiple curves for your headphones, for your room. You can put a Harman curve in it. You can put a curve in it for your system. You can tune your speakers using REW with their DAC with their digital processing, without having to go out and buy any fancy digital processing and put it within your system. So if you haven't used it, it's something I'd recommend. It really works pretty well.
And it supports Logitech, Alan. So
yeah,
so
interesting.
I play my touch through the Rune server.
Well, the Wim Ultra supports LMS, and I've been playing that today, and it works seamlessly. $329. And LMS is free, of course. Yeah, it's interesting talking about the different chips and so forth, what I had read, and I think I posted a link to this guy, the old hi-fi guy, I think is his YouTube channel, who I just stumbled upon, and he raves about the AKM Velvet chipset. And I was just checking the topping, which is a Chinese Chi-Fi product. The E70 Velvet DAC is $450 on Amazon with a 30-day free returns. So that's what I'm going to try when I get back from vacation. But he says they purposely engineered. As you recall, AKM had that big fire and they had to shut down. They lost a ton of business, and that's what impacted, for the most part, the backlog on the whole supply chain for automobile chipsets was impacted significantly because of the AKM fire. But they've rebooted, rebuilt the factories, and they were supposedly trying to play catch up now to ESS and some of the other, Burr Brown and who else makes DAC chips, certainly. and they came up with this concept of doing something that's basically the equivalent of a resistor ladder within the chipset, combined with a Delta Sigma processing.
Yep.
And this guy raves about it. It'll be interesting. The one thing I've heard, that the problem with a laddered resistor format is that the tolerances of the resistors have to be so close, so exact. That's why they're so expensive, because obviously building it within specs is difficult. So that's one drawback to taking that approach. I think the Lampizator DAC is a ladder DAC with a tube, I believe.
Yeah,
And that's
TCSR.
yeah, I've heard good things about it. I heard it at one of the shows. I don't recall it standing out, but it depended upon the whole system. But it's interesting how the technology evolves. And speaking of other things, like Roon can do room correction and other things, I'm just now looking at my WIM app on my smartphone, and I don't know if I got the latest update. I don't think I did, but they just released beta firmware for the Android mobile app that does have room correction. And the biggest problem, they said, is that every Android phones all have different microphones, and they all have different capabilities and corrections for an accurate audio measurement. But apparently they've come up with some way to test your phone for the microphone type and automatically do the correction. And then they can go ahead to calibrate it internally for your smartphone, your microphone, however it's implemented, and then go ahead with the room correction. So I have to download the latest update and play with that as well. Again, $349 for the WIM Ultra that has that capability built in, which is incredible.
Hey,
Wow.
hey, Alan,
Yes.
can you tell if it will also accept like an externally developed convolution file that you can just kind of like load in?
I don't know. I don't think so, but I suppose somebody's going to come up with a workaround. But one thing I'll tell you that's absolutely amazing about a company, and Oppo comes to mind as one of these companies that was just so attuned to their customer base and responsiveness and support. And I'd heard good things about WIM. WIM is a US-based company, but they're manufactured in China. The parent company is called Link Play. And the principals behind it are guys from Google, I think, and Amazon, and pretty bright engineers. And I've heard they've had great support. One of my biggest, as I put in my email, is the fact that it will not simultaneously output digital output through the SPDF and coax simultaneously. You can do one or the other. You can't do both. My touch does. So I feed the same signal, one to my receiver, one to my 2-channel system, and I can have synchronized music on my lanai and in the family room using different devices. And I posted on the WIM, not even a support forum, just in the WIM forum about I was disappointed that it doesn't offer that. Within 1 hour, somebody from WIM, a support person, wrote back and said, hang on a second, we're working on that. We understand there's some people have asked for that, and we think it's going to be possible. Stay tuned. Pretty impressive.
Alan, do you ever spend any time with looking at the ASR website, Audio Science Review?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Sure.
Because I mean, he's gone over all this stuff extensively on there. And at least if you believe measurements are the way to go, he has extensive measurements about all these different products and shows in great detail which ones are truly state of the art and which ones fall short. And a lot of the audiophile stuff really was like shown to be lacking. And this inexpensive stuff from China is shown to be exceptional. Of course, they're designing for it because he's proven that it does make a difference and it's transparent.
Well, does it make a difference if you really have a huge signal noise ratio? How audible is that versus other aspects? I think that measurements are important. I used to be 90% objectivist, 10% subjectivist. Now I'm more like 50-50. I want it to sound good.
Yeah,
and even
absolutely.
if it doesn't measure great, if it sounds good to my ears, that's all that matters.
Agreed. And I have to say, I agree with you 100%. He does take the time though to go and listen to the products that excel. And he has a really good system. He
Yeah.
has a lot of information about his system, and I'm assuming the guy can hear because he seems like he's really dialed in. But he does make comments about how they actually sound as opposed to, and he also, but he doesn't bother to listen to them if they're junk. You know, he just listens to the really good stuff and says, yeah, this, you know, this is really an awesome piece of gear. So I think he's done a lot for the industry as far as getting the manufacturers a slap across the face and saying, look, you can't just market this expensive piece of stuff and tell people it's great. And the reality is it doesn't really cut the mustard compared to something that's a fraction of the cost, which is WIM and all these other guys are proving the same thing. So,
Yeah. My concern though is that certainly these high volume manufacturers like WIM, Topping, and many others are basically just trying to hit the specs, and
And-
they could care less maybe and cut back elsewhere. If it's not being measured,
right,
let's just make sure we have something to market.
right.
And they're selling units. That's why they're cranking out units. Like every 6 months, they have a brand new upgrade,
Yeah.
a brand new device.
You know, but like Mola
Yeah.
Mola showed to be an exceptionally great piece of gear,
Mhm.
you know, and you know, it's in the top 15 pieces of gear that they've tested. Whereas like the Cord in some other in the PS audio stuff is like, you know, so what? You know, it's
Yeah,
15-year-old sound. Why are you doing that? You know, so
Yeah.
it really
Yeah.
it's a great go-to if you're thinking about buying something, because if it doesn't get in the top 20 units, just find something that does, because there's plenty of gear out there that's whatever you want it to be. So
Mhm.
Yeah, he
Absolutely.
hit the core pretty badly.
yeah,
Huh.
the cord was a turd.
Yes,
Wow. Okay, Joe, your hand is up.
an expensive one at that.
Yeah, I'd like to get a consensus. It seems like the industry is going in a different direction. At the beginning, we were breaking out individual components like transports and DACs and the whole thing. And now what I'm seeing happen with streamers and preamplifiers is that they're incorporating DACs into other components. Does anybody feel like we're moving in the direction where DACs are going to be obsolete, where they're not going to be individual components any longer?
Yes.
I think it's possible, but I think what's happening, the industry is going more to the mainstream consumer and simplifying things. So if they're able to provide reasonably good performance at a reasonable price in a simple one box or maybe two box solution, that's what sells. And it's all about making money. So it's business.
But I
And
mean,
I think that
right now, Alan, you talk about the WIM for $349. They are definitely zeroing in on audiophiles. I mean, so audiophiles are being lured in by $10,000 DACs at this point. If we look at the Dave or something like that, and we're looking to reclock and we're looking to upsample, and then they'll come up with the WIM for $349, and you know, people just like Oppo took the world by storm. I mean, I was never a big Oppo fan, but I just watched it take over every single club that everybody bought an Oppo because there was so much functionality there. All right, maybe it was mostly functionality and not sound quality. I don't know. I mean, maybe it was sound quality, but it definitely took the industry by storm because it did so many things, and it did them really cheap. I mean, their cheapest unit was $1,000, and for an audiophile, that's nothing. So what I'm seeing now, though, especially like I'm looking at Macintosh selling $9,000 preamps, $15,000 preamps, and they're sticking a DAC in there, you know. And then I'm looking at these streamers, and now it's hard to find a streamer without a DAC, you know. So I'm saying, and we were talking about the R2R DACs and this Delta Sigma DACs and the FPGA DACs. And my point is they're getting to a point where, can you hear the difference? You know, are we getting to the point where a DAC is just going to be an included chip, just like FM was to receivers in the olden days? And
we already are. Basically, for most consumer products, like Gary's, you know, I don't know who doesn't. He probably doesn't even know what kind of DAC chip is inside his receiver.
Mhm.
You know,
Right.
and cars have DACs. Every piece of electronics nowadays, our TVs have
Right.
DAC chips.
Your
I mean,
phone has one.
when I play Q-Buzz on my computer, it spits it out in digital and I need a DAC. but when I play Q-Buzz on my iPad, I just get music. I don't care if the DAC is going in, is being processed with software, which I can never
No,
understand.
no,
I'm-
you have
I'm
a
very
DAC
so-
and the iPad.
I'm a software background person, and I wrote software for a living, and I could never understand why DAC processing wasn't done in software from the very beginning. Because
It's
if
not
you want
done in
to talk
software.
about,
There's a DAC in the iPad.
okay, but
Yeah.
that's besides the point. The point is that, like Tony was talking about FPGA and how programmable it is. And yeah, the flexibility is there because it is programmable. But if DAC processing was done in the software domain, you could have did it extremely programmable. You could. I don't understand why
It's,
that
it's
couldn't
not
be
a
done in the
software problem.
domain.
It requires hardware.
I didn't say it was a software problem. I said that same processing could be done in the software domain, in my opinion.
Well, they do it
Don't
within
know enough.
FPGA with firmware.
I mean, it's just math, isn't it? Just math in essence, very computational math in order to, I don't know how it works exactly. Beyond my pay grade.
Well, you know, of course, PCM is completely different than DSD. I mean, the way it's processed, but
But you have to generate an analog signal. Think about that, right? So
I
you
know.
do need hardware, right? I mean,
Hmm.
you can do all the software you want, but at the end of the day, software is just digital. You're playing around with bits, and what comes out of of an algorithm is still bits. So you can't hear bits. You can't listen to bits. You need something that takes those bits and converts them to an analog signal. Does that make
Right, but
sense?
you say it needs hardware, but why couldn't it just use the hardware chip, the hardware chip in a computer, you know, the Intel chip? It could use that chip
But
just like anything
that
else.
chip is a processor, if you will. It doesn't convert a digital signal into an analog signal. An analog signal is like a wave, like a sine wave, if you will. And a digital signal is little squares, zeros and ones. You can't listen to zeros and ones. If you listen to it, you'll hear gobbledygook. So you need some hardware to convert that digital signal into an analog signal that you can listen to, right?
Well,
Makes sense.
if I put it in the olden days when I put a CD in a computer, it played the music. Does it have a separate DAC in it?
It had a DAC in it, yes. And it used to be at the beginning, it was R2R, by the way, Alan. R2R
Oh,
is
really?
not new, right?
Huh,
That
huh.
was the original implementation of a DAC, was just a resistor ladder.
Huh.
Mhm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Makes
And
sense. Yeah, they didn't have that chip technology quite yet.
yeah, right. And if you think about it, you have a bunch of bits that represent a number, and that number has a high weight, so that's that's a voltage, and then you run it through a resistor and a series of those, and you can shape a waveform and come out with something that's analog that way.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay, Will, your hand is up.
I'm sorry, I forgot where we were going with this whole thing. I apologize. I listened to what everybody was saying. Yeah, I mean, I at the end of the day, I don't really know that to this point in time, it makes any difference what they're using to convert the signal. It's all gotten so darn good. I mean, you can just look at the mathematical testing, whether you like the way that particular device sounds or not. If the distortion is so infinitesimally low that the signal noise ratio plus noise is 123 to 125 dB, and we can only hear 115 dB, who the hell cares? You're better off to buy the right set of speakers and tune your room properly, and maybe get a tube preamp if that's the way you like it to sound, than you are to think that the DAC is going to make a major difference in the way your system sounds.
Yeah.
I have a very expensive DAC at home, and frankly, I would love to sell the thing, but I don't know who's going to buy it because you can buy something that's 10 times better for a fraction of the price today, which is frustrating. But anyway.
Yeah.
You might want to
Interesting.
try to sell that DAC. Bart just got really good money. You can ask him how he did it. He sold the Meitner DAC that he loved before, and now he's using the Anthem. So, and he got a really good price for it. So I think he did it on an auction. You might want to text him.
Oh, okay.
So,
All right.
okay.
Will do. Thank you.
Interesting. Joe, we haven't heard from you tonight. I'm curious. You're sitting there in the background. Do you have any thoughts on what's your system? Do you have a DAC? And what do you think about this?
Yeah, so I just actually moved to Florida last June. So I
Ah.
closed on my house in April. So if I had my computer a little more mobile, I would show you stuff. But I have a lot of tube equipment. I do mostly all tube here. DAC wise, yeah, Weem, I have used them in the past, like with the I guess the Pro Plus. I had the Pro. I think they used, let me see, the Pro had, I believe, a Burr Brown, and then they went to a AKA chip. And then the Winamp, which is nice for like the computer. They were powered some powered Klipsch 5s, which I actually really like that speaker, for a little desktop system. But I do have an Eversolo A6,
Ah.
which is very very neat. I mean, I haven't used it like some of the what you've been using for music servers. It's really more for digital, more for playback. But it is a really nice system. The software is really, really good. I find it very useful. I mean, whatever you can do on the touchscreen, you can do it on through the app. And they also seem to take user feedback, and of course, they're usually putting out updates. I would say every 3, 4, maybe 5 weeks for user
Yeah,
input.
they added a lot LMS, what was Logitech Music Server capability also now.
Oh yeah,
Lyrion Music Server, but
this ability also added Room. Same thing with the Wim stuff. They added that on the last update. So anybody who does the Room, ecosystem.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Eversolo has a sister company, or maybe it's the same company, Zidu, I think.
Yes, it is. Yeah, they had
which is a.
Trying to think, they had like a regular, I think called the Z8 for a while when they released the A6, and then there's the A6 Master Edition. I think it does have different clocks.
Yeah, that's the new one.
Right, and well, the A8 is the new one.
Yeah, ASR just reviewed that, and it passed with flying colors. Truly state of the art.
Yeah, the A8 is supposed to be really, really nice.
It's apparently a Rose Hi-Fi killer. The high-end Rose server DAC streamer all in one, with the output, and it has, I think, the Eversolo also has, I believe, HDMI output. You can play the album art on your TV, I think.
Yeah, and they also add, I guess, I2.
Yeah, you can do surround with it.
Yeah. So it really, they really, I guess they're taking, user input, but we'll see. I mean, it's been probably, how, that world, they keep something for, 4, 5, 6 months, and then boom, and they're out with something else. So, but yeah, the A8 really has been getting, and this is with multiple different reviewers really getting some good high marks.
Yeah, sometimes some of the hype from the YouTubers,
you
have to separate out. It's hard to find out how much is hype and how much is legit reviews.
Exactly. That's true.
I had an interesting thought, even with the Wim, although I was looking, I have a mesh system now for my Wi-Fi throughout the house, and I can see how many Internet of Things devices are attached. We have, I think, 60 devices in the house that utilize it. And like at any given point, we'll have 35 to 40 that are connected. I'm thinking, what if all this Chi-Fi stuff that's coming out, the real intention is that is basically getting into our networks and spying on us.
Yep. Yeah, that's a
what better way to get into every American household than to have state-of-the-art, inexpensive audio gear that everybody snaps up and plugs into their home network.
It's like TikTok, it's like I told my, don't install it. Who knows what they're stripping from your information?
Yeah, that's a whole separate can
that's a
of
whole
worms.
Separate conversation. Yeah, that's
so how many of us are hiding military secrets?
I'm more concerned about my financial logins, my retirement. Yeah. I don't think that's really what's going on, but it certainly gives you some food for thought. How trusting are we of these? Certainly from Chinese and European manufacturers, or what if they have nefarious motive for building these things?
It's true.
One thing we haven't argued about, I should say, or two things actually I wanted to touch upon. One is jitter. How audible is jitter? We talked about that last time in our last meeting about trying to minimize jitter, but and Phil, you talked, I think you maybe shared a link in our discussion forum about measuring jitter, but that was really jitter based on your internet connectivity, how much jitter was coming through. But how important is it to measure jitter on our home audio gear, certainly the DAC, and when does it become critical? Yes, Phil.
Well, the only thing I can say from personal experience is that if you get a better clock in your DAC, the music will sound better. Okay, there's a 1-to-1 correlation there. That if a clock is better in the DAC, so but that's the only comment that I can say. Now, independent of what's going on in the internet, once you get the DAC gets control of that information and converts it to analog, it's very much like the same thing that we were talking about in the way of an output stage, a good analog output stage. So, my experience is better clocks make better sound.
Is there going to be any need really to have a separate master clock like it was offered in the past, where you have a DAC with a master clock input, and then you buy a separate outboard, higher quality clock?
Well, to me, there's a law of diminishing returns, and we're talking about a $349 DAC and a $300,000 or $900,000 DAC or whatever it was. So you have to think there's a certain amount of investment that has to be made in order to advance the state of the art. Okay, it can't be done with $349 units. You have to spend more money in order to develop new technologies. So hence the need to have, better sounding systems and a support group that will supply cash flow for a company who's willing to take the time and say, okay, this was good. What can we do better? Okay. And that's why the high end market is there. It's like a Formula One race car. It's several $1 million, and if you crash one, you got to start over, and so it's, there's an investment that has to be made in order to advance the state of the art. So is an external clock necessary for an audio system? I'd say for the average system, no. Once you get into the etheric realm, you may be able to hear a difference. I don't know. I'm not there.
How would you rate, because I have the Oppo also, the Oppo 205. That's what you have, the 205 or the 105?
I have a 205, yeah.
Okay, 205, which was their state-of-the-art one at the time. How would you rate its overall sound?
Well, I don't have the 205 you have.
Oh, you modded it.
Like you wouldn't believe. And it sounds pretty good. In fact, last time you were at our house listening to the system, that's what you were listening through. You were listening through that DAC. It sounded okay. It doesn't sound as good as Brad's DAC, which was, megabucks, but it sounds pretty darn good. Was it a good bang for the buck when I bought it? No, you bet. Did it take a lot in order to get it up to the level that it's performing today? No one would do that. No one would invest that amount of time and money in order to do it.
It's a Philopo. Philopo.
Yeah, right.
Like the Philzacs, the Bozak, Philizized.
The audio Phil, yeah. So the answer to your question is the average person, no, to put a master clock in a home system, boy, unless you're running a whole bunch of digital conversions or digital systems, in series, no. And but you can buy really good master clocks today for under $1,000. So the price of that technology is coming down, and who knows where that will go? As if the industry says, well, let's go ahead and see how we can leverage off of that and make more money.
Yeah.
So, and that's what it's all about, right?
And when you say master clock, you're still referring to the LH SAW6 thing?
Yeah, you can use an external clock on that. It uses the internal, but it's selectable for an external little jumper inside of there.
No, what I mean to say, when you say a master clock, you're referring to that network switch?
No.
Oh,
No, a real master clock.
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
real master
Yeah,
clock.
a real master clock. Or yeah,
A 10
not as-
megahertz clock?
excuse me?
10 megahertz clock that feeds
Yeah.
that
Yeah, 10
switch?
megahertz master clock. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But then, some DACs don't, most DACs that I know of, commercial, that you and I would have, don't have a master clock input. The DSS, I think, take a clock, and some of the real expensive ones do, but most
Mhm.
DACs don't take a clock.
Correct.
I think a studio for the pro versions probably all have that, like the Weiss and some others
Yeah.
that probably.
Yeah.
Maybe the WIM Ultra Plus will have a master clock input.
Really?
No, I'm kidding.
Instead of 349, it'll be 350.
Yeah.
Like
you-
like Phil said though, there's the in high-end audio, there are, I mean, if we look at DACs, you can get a $350 DAC, you can get a $3,000 DAC, or you can get a $30,000 DAC. I was at some store and I think he was saying, why buy the $10,000 DAC? Save your money, give it some time, and buy the $30,000 DAC. The reason the $30,000 DAC is out there is because some audiophile really feels that it's worth it and that he could hear it, like the Borenson mono two-way speakers out there for $50,000. Some people think that they could hear it. Some people think it's worth it, and they have the money and they buy it. And it's like any other high-end a yacht or anything else that people buy. And some people feel that it's worth it. Now, in the digital, we were sort of joking about, in the digital world, what's there now for $30,000 could be there for $3,000 6 months from now. Okay. And it's somebody's guess to say, and in a way, I don't mean this in a bad way, Phil, but when you say, well, it can't be done for $350. Well, it might not be able to be done for $350 5 years ago, but maybe
Yeah.
today it could be done for $300.
That's right. Just wait 6 months.
So
Yeah.
the digital field is so moving. It's moving so quickly. We have to decide as audiophiles, is it worth the is the $30,000 DAC? Is that really worth it? We all have to decide on what equipment to buy that we feel is going to work for us. And so the digital though is a little bit more obscure, I think, because I don't know. It's harder for me to nail down digital sound than it is analog. Like analog, if I put a preamp in or a power amp, they seem to be more differences at this point in time. Maybe at one time, you heard that in digital, but as digital gets better, I think it becomes harder and harder to decipher.
Yeah, I agree. John, your hand's up. Good points, Joe. Thank you.
So I'll just bring it back to the shows. Expona, our show, Mike Bovaird shop. I've been in there and listening to hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment. And then I'll go into a room and they've spent $10,000 on it, but it's more musical and sounds better than those big systems with a separate clock, the ladder DAC, the this, the that. So I'll just go back and saying it's like a big stew. You gotta stir the stew, the cables, the DAC, the amp. I mean, it's all they all depend on each other to get the good sound. And like I said, I've just heard so many broken rules on that. This should sound better than this, but it doesn't. I mean, we're sitting there, we keep going into the room, like Bart and I, or Mike and I, or even Joe and I, right, Joe? Or Alan. I've seen Alan there. I mean, you've seen these rooms. You're like, that should not sound that good. Jerry has a system, that Wharfdale speaker. I don't know if you've heard those Wharfdale speakers that he has. We've heard them in different shows. I think they're like $699 a piece or something. And they just bury some of these other, so musical and with a reasonably priced DAC. So I just think that, in my opinion, you have to kind of look at the whole thing. I mean, DACs are important for sure, but it's just the whole presentation of what it is, I think.
I agree.
I
Point,
think it's
Alan.
interesting where you're talking about our audio file is going to exist or audio file grade component is going to exist. I think they'll always exist, but we're a diminishing demographic, unfortunately. We're dinosaurs, we're dying off. The future is the millennials and the people. They don't have disposable income, so they can only afford to buy things at entry or mid levels. And that's where the companies are focusing their marketing, if not their research. But I'll give you an example. I'm a big Martin Logan fan. I have Martin Logan Expression loudspeakers, which is not the top of the line. It's the third model down from the top. And my speakers are like about 10 years old now, and they're long overdue for a refresh, but nothing has been forthcoming. But Martin Logan over the last week was dropping hints. August 2nd, stay tuned for a big reveal. And those of us that are active on the Martin Logan Owners Forum were saying, oh, maybe they're finally going to refresh the Masterpiece line. It's overdue, or maybe the Balance 4 subs that are long overdue that have been around for probably 12 years. And what do they announce? New entry-level foundation series subwoofers, because that's where the money is. That's where the market is. And it actually looks like they took a step back in terms of overall technology. The Grotto, the Depth, and the old ones from that mid-priced line were initially 3 speakers in an array, a balanced array, or maybe 2, and now they just have 1 driver with 2 passive radiators. So it seems like and the price, of course, is much higher, but it supposedly will utilize room correction as well. But it's interesting. I think companies have to market to where the demographics are, and we are a declining demographic. No two ways about it. So I think you're going to see a lot of the high-end companies falling by the wayside. Look what just happened now. That whole rigmarole with was it Denon Marantz DRM being purchased by Massimo? You know about this? Massimo is a medical device manufacturer that make pulse oximeters, and I used to use them in the operating room. And they bought DRM Holdings, which is were the master parent company of Class A, Denon, Marantz, and others. And everybody said, "What the hell's going on here?" Well, it turns out all they did is they wanted some of the technology that they could then use for medical devices, basically some of the patents that DRM had. And now they're selling DRM, but they don't even have any buyers for it. And they shut down Class A, the company that was based in Canada. Yeah, they totally shuttered the doors and fired everybody. And I think we're going to see more and more of that consolidation and failures in the high end. And there'll always be big, megalopolis companies, big corporations that will crank out higher end stuff. But I think the trend is more for the consumer oriented products. And that's why WIM and Topping and some of these Chi-Fi manufacturers are doing so well. Not much we can do about that. And Leo and then Gary.
Yeah, so I was going to say that, maybe this is a question for some of you that go to shows and such, but I've never listened to the MSB DACs. And I was wondering if I can hear some comments. I mean, are these things really worth $98,000 or hundred thousands of dollars, for the top of the line signature, whatever they call that thing? Is it really worth it to spend that kind of money? Do you hear the difference? I mean, have you heard any of this, John or Alan? Have you heard these things?
I have not, but you get to a point of diminishing returns. But there is just basically for bragging rights for people that probably aren't even audiophiles. They're just buying it for, I would think, bragging rights that they can afford it.
I got to say, I did hear all that MSB stuff. I'm trying to remember the name of the store. I don't remember it offhand, but it's on the East Coast. And I did hear all the MSB DACs. Now, there was one that was, I don't remember the name offhand, but I know when they released it, it was $10,000.
Okay.
And that was their entry level DAC.
Now it's 100,000.
Well, what they did was they modified that DAC. They had an upgrade, and it was a $10,000 upgrade. So the DAC was, when it hit the market, was $10,000. It was their entry level product, And then the upgrade was another $10,000. And the proprietor of the store was saying, oh, it's well worth it. Don't listen to it. You know, that's the old audiophile saying, don't listen to it if you're not prepared to buy it, because you're just going to find it so much better. And I gotta say,
Hi-fi salesman.
I was impressed with the DAC. Was I impressed with the $40,000 DAC more than the $10,000 DAC? That's impossible to say.
You know, I've gone into
If you had to pay it,
the What's Best forum. Have you guys go there any time? Okay,
Yeah.
so there was a discussion there about the MSB stuff, and they went on and on and on about the the money you get back when you the what do you call it, the replacement cost, you trade in value, right? They were talking about, oh, I bought this for 90,000, now I can't get this other one unless I pay 50 grand more. And there was all about the money. I never heard anybody talking about how good they like it, or what kind of music they listen through it, or nothing. It was all
If you
money
want,
driven.
if you want, make an appointment with Mike, and you can hear the MSD, anyone you want. He has
Okay.
them. He carries MSB. I've heard them a number of times. They're very good. But are they worth the money? Is there something out there that's probably 1/10 the price is just as good? I can't say that.
Right.
But they are very good.
I wonder what Mike would say behind closed doors with truth serum.
And a couple beers.
Yeah.
Let's work on that.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I've kind of talked to him about some of those issues. I forget who it was. He had a client who had just, I don't know, he owned like 15 hotels in Puerto Rico or something like that, or Jamaica, and he had just sold one of his hotels. And, he really wanted a superb, system. It was kind of like a, money is no object kind of thing. It's hard to believe that 100 grand is nothing to some people. And I guess if you just sold a hotel and you want to celebrate and you're going to invest in your stereo system, and you want the best of the best, 100 grand in a $1 million system is nothing. Now,
so I just have to add this when we're talking about Mike. What I love Mike. What a great guy, and his stories. He's just really tells really good stories. His latest thing was he sold a bedroom system in Boca Raton for $2 million. And he has a picture, and I'm not kidding. I'll send the picture out. I could post a picture. He wouldn't care. And the guy the guy is sitting on the bed. He's an older guy. He can't walk a lot, and he's laying on his bed listening to this system. It has the big Magicos. It has all this equipment. $2 million system in his bedroom. So I'm like, you should put that on your website and say, look what you can get for $2 million for your bedroom.
I can do a lot of things in my bedroom, but I'm not sure that's what I want to do. Listen to Magic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
For
but the
$2 million,
funniest
I
thing
could have a
too,
lot more fun.
He's like
Yeah.
telling Mike, he goes, listen to this, come on over, sit in the sweet spot. And Mike's on his bed. It was hilarious. Anyways, I thought you'd
Amazing.
get a kick out of that.
Yeah, I believe it. Gary, your hand is up.
sometimes I wonder what these people are looking for when they're spending $1 million on an audio system. What kind of sound improvements do they think they're going to get? Do they know how to listen to sound? I don't know. Anyway, I was going to say Martin Logan also came out with a new box speaker, right?
Well, they have the Foundation series as a whole series of box speakers. Yeah.
Oh, that seems
Yeah.
unusual.
They're basically
And,
Paradigm and Martin Logan are the same company now. So they're sharing technology on the box speakers. And I think that's going to be their focus. They'll continue to make electrostatic, I suspect, but I don't think there's going to be a lot of new models coming
I hope
out.
so.
I think mine is one of the last,
And,
I think, because
you have been talking about room correction a lot. We got to make sure to distinguish between EQ, equalization, and room correction, two distinctly different things. Everybody know what I'm talking about?
Really, I thought it was the same thing.
Equalization of a room. No, equalization is REW or whatever equalization process you use. I use the 2496s, but room correction is trying to get rid of reflections and stuff.
Oh,
You know what I mean?
Well, it's best. Well, there's acoustic treatments, obviously, ways to, I guess that falls into that category to correct the sound versus pure electronic or computational room correction, which is like what REW or Anthem or others,
room
Odyssey.
Room treatment's different from room correction. I usually call it room treatment, and then room correction would be REW and
Yeah,
things
and
like that.
EQ is not the same.
room
EQ is a tool.
Yeah, EQ is like a parametric equalizer where you can measure and then manually do it. So room correction, I would say, what?
Room correction is like Anthem. I forget all the commercial names of these products.
Anthem room
but
correction.
One speaker will send out a contra signal to another speaker to try to neutralize its reflections. I don't think that's
Well, no,
the right attitude.
it's not that. It's not that. What it is, though, is that it sends out a signal, a sweep. The chirping sweep, full frequency response, measures with a microphone in one or multiple locations, averages the response, and then creates convolution curves to counter the room anomalies, typically just to reduce the peaks to try to flatten the room response, not boosting frequencies per se. So that's room EQ, as I understand it.
You could do that manually, or you can let a machine do it. I mean, I prefer to. It's still room correction.
Right.
Whether you do it manually or not, you're still doing the same thing. Now, REW has actually an option that you can actually post the curve in there, and it'll flatten it out for you and tell you the PEQ filters and everything to do it. So, and it gives you the waterfall.
Great, but I'm not talking about equalization. I'm talking about room correction.
Well, look at John.
Getting rid of reflections.
Yeah, look at John. John's got some room correction right there on the side of his wall there. There you go. There's some room correction right there.
Actually, it's actually the head of my bed, but yeah,
I
you
know.
can use it as that.
I know, but that's the physical room correction. You can also use a tool, an EQ, to try and bring out some of those nodes and bring out some of those peaks, and that's also a tool used to help correct the room. I think Anthem is taking EQ and they're calling it room correction because they want to sell a solution to solve the problem. And the problem is you've got these nodes in these rooms and you don't have a headboard next to you that can help dampen it. So one of the tools you can use is the Anthem EQ, which they're calling room, to help correct the room.
Like we've got like DAC, you've got Odyssey, you've got many others that all do variations of that using a little bit different technology. I don't know which one is better, but it's not the end all be all, obviously. Ideally, you want to have the room and the room design being as optimized as it can before you apply any correction, so you minimize any of those issues. But what struck me is that the fact that this little WIM Ultra is implementing that technology as well. Now, it's probably not going to be as good as Anthem room correction or DAC or anything like that. But the fact that they can do some basic room EQ from this little device using your smartphone is pretty incredible.
Pretty cool. Hey, going back to that discussion, Alan, do you guys have any experience comparisons between, say, playing back DSD files versus PCM files? Do you prefer DSD versus PCM, or do you notice any difference? Does it depend on your DAC? Whether your DAC processes DSD natively or not? I mean, can anyone speak to DSD or their experience with that?
I could say I saw a demo at a show, and I think it was an Expona a couple of years back, and they played at least 10 tunes in PCM and DSD. And DSD sounded better every single time. And it would 10 completely different, the same recording, but recorded in PCM and the other ones recorded in DSD. And the DSD sounded better every single time. Now, I know that these demos are geared or tuned to make a certain point, okay? But then I saw another demo, and what is that? That other storage process from England. I think Meridian made it. What is that? The 3 letters.
MQA.
MQA. I saw a demo with MQA and compared to CPM, and I could not hear any difference. Everything sounded different, but I couldn't say it sounded better. And I got thrown out of that room because I said to the guy, I said, is MQA supposed to sound better? And he said, and everybody said, oh, it does sound better. It does. And then, they asked me to leave. But I could say with the DSD and the CPM, I definitely heard the DSD sound better in every single case.
Like we said last meeting, though, it matter how it starts. It matters how it starts more than because
yes, these were recordings that were recorded in both. They originated in DSD and they originated in PCM. Okay, so these were recordings that were the same recording but recorded in both modes.
But I think John's point is that
that was their native recording.
Yeah, but I think John's point is about what happens after, you begin with DSD, but what all do you do with it by the time it gets to your speakers, right? So I'm sure the stuff in the middle plays a role, but assuming that your DAC or whatever you have in the middle can consume it natively, right? It can deal with it natively.
Right.
Does it sound better? That was the question. John?
Yeah, and in this instance, that was the case.
Okay.
It was native DSD and it was native PCM,
Okay.
and it sounded better in DSD every single time.
Okay.
And my experience at home is pretty much the same. I'm not saying there's drastic differences, but PCM definitely has a modality that I hear, and I think we all got used to because we all sort of started with PCM and we sort of got used to that certain modality or certain color that it adds to the music. And my personal opinion is that DSD does not have that modality.
It's more analog, you think? Is that
That's hard to say. I just don't think it has it doesn't have the PCM flavor in my opinion.
And that may not be a good thing.
SACDs. Yeah, SACDs are basically, DSD.
That's what it is, DSD, SAC.
Yeah. But again, for the consumer, it just never flew. Paul McGowan of PS Audio, Cookie Marenko of Blue Coast Records, they swear that DSD is better and they record in DSD, but they will convert and sell the recordings. I don't know about Paul. Paul, you can buy from Octave Records, I think, a piece of FLAC.
Yep.
So but the problem is are you really, if you buy both, for instance, I think, as I recall, I may even have some downloads that I got that from Blue Coast Records years ago where they offered it for free, one track, both PCM and DSD of various resolution, like two resolutions of each, where you could do your own comparison. They were obviously recorded the exact same time through the same microphone, but just handled differently. That would be an interesting comparison. I don't play DSD, so I just have PCM, and I don't believe anything greater than 2496 is worth it. I have some 192 recordings on DVDs actually that I bought from MA Records. I don't hear a difference between that and 2496, but it could be my aging ears.
Yeah, like I was saying, there's some CDs that I have the DSD of, but I also have the CD of, and the CD sound better in some cases. And then I have DSDs that sound better, and then I have PCMs. You know what I mean? It kind of depends how it starts, how the recording started. Like that.
How they mastered it.
I'm sorry. Yeah, how they mastered it.
Yeah, I mean, who took the care, who made the final mix, who made the final balancing? That makes more difference than anything else we're talking about.
That's what I think. Well, that's what I think.
Yep. I agree. But the other thing to keep in mind is that there are very, very few straight DSD unprocessed recordings available. You can find them. They're on like Native DSD and some other sites like that, and Paul McGowan does them and Cookie does them. But most recordings that are captured in DSD format have to if they get processed, they must be converted to PCM. you cannot process a DSD recording.
Yeah.
Right.
You
That's
cannot
probably
do
the
it.
problem, right? That that's probably what keeps it from being the de facto standard, right? Because all the processing that goes on has to be done with PCM.
It's correct. So, but they do exist. The demo tracks that Cookies released, I have those. The stuff that Joe heard, I remember us talking about that, Joe. I believe those were straight DSD recordings that were done
They were
versus
native.
straight PCM.
Almost.
No
right.
processing on the DSD, but those are few and far between.
Yeah. Well, and by the same token, guys, if you got a 15 IPS half-track master recorder that came out of a studio in the first generation, you know,
That beats them
that's-
all.
that beats them
Yep.
all. Yeah,
It sure
so
does.
nothing you can do better than analog tape, you know, if it's right off the console. So, guys, I'm gonna
Yeah.
have to jump off. I enjoyed the call very much
Sure.
tonight. Thanks very much.
Yeah,
for
we're
that.
at the witching hour, 2 hours. I think I've got to run also, but that was interesting. The funny thing is that when CDs first came out, you know, we bought the basic CD players, we hooked them up. It was a single box. We didn't think about all this. It was what it was, digital playback. Now we have all these esoteric aspects, just like analog has all what the cartridge and whatnot, the plinth, all the things the audiophiles do, basically splitting hairs. And now we're doing the same thing with digital.
And even more so.
And more so, who knew that we could even do that with digital? Okay, this was great, guys. Thank you. Thank you, Leo, for the suggestions on topics. And
Thank you.
everybody be well. We need to have more listening sessions. As I said, let me stop the recording here again. Thank everybody for participating. Let me just go ahead and stop this. I'll just say a couple